We've got lots of news to get to, so let's start with that. Starting off with the Operation Epic Fury, Vice President J.D. Vance says U.S. negotiators are likely leaving Pakistan without a deal after marathon talks with Iran came up empty.
We've been at it now for 21 hours, and we've had a number of substantive discussions with the Iranians. That's the good news. The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement, and I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news for the United States of America. So we go back to the United States having not come to an agreement. We've made very clear what our red lines are. We've made that as clear as we possibly could, and they have chosen not to accept our terms.
21 hours. Wow. Chief Foreign Correspondent Trey Yingst joining us now from Tel Aviv with the very latest. Good morning, Trey.
Yeah, hey guys, good morning. After 21 hours of talks in Islamabad, Pakistan, there is no deal with Iran. Vice President J.D. Vance was joined by Special Envoys Witkoff and Kushner after the meeting and said this.
The simple fact is that we need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon, and they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon. That is the core goal of the President of the United States, and that's what we've tried to achieve through these negotiations.
Reports indicate there are still gaps on the issues of uranium enrichment, control of the Strait of Hormuz, and the release of frozen Iranian assets. There are now questions about what comes next amid an ongoing U.S. military buildup across the Middle East that includes more transport planes landing here each day. President Trump spoke over the weekend about the situation.
Let me just tell you, we win, no matter what. We've defeated their military. They have no Navy. 158 ships are underwater, undersea. All of their minesweepers and all of their, they call them mine droppers. Can you imagine? A country has 28 mine droppers. You think that's nice? With all of that being said, they're all defeated, by the way. They're all at the bottom of the sea.
As the talks are ongoing in Islamabad, Israel and Hezbollah continued to trade blows, with Hezbollah launching drones and rockets into northern Israel and the Israelis striking southern Lebanon.
The campaign is not over yet, but it is already clear. We have historic achievements. I want to remember where we were. Iran tried to encircle us with a stranglehold. Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Assad regime in Syria, the militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen. Iran itself, they wanted to strangle us, and we are strangling them. They threatened us with annihilation, and they are now fighting to survive. We have prepared them. We still have more to do.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu there saying the campaign is not over yet. Guys?
So, Trey, can you give us any update on, obviously we saw the USS Peterson and Murphy go into the Strait to try and clear a path for those trapped hundreds of tankers. Have we seen any increase in movement in maritime traffic?
Yeah, there's been a little bit of increase in traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, but notably yesterday, U.S. Central Command said they've started an operation to clear mines in the Strait, sending 2 Navy destroyers through this area. So it's a significant signal, again, about the control of the Strait and the ability of the U.S. Navy. But also, when you speak about the Iranian Navy, the president is correct. Much of it is at the bottom of the sea. And the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, said a quote from a previous war that rings true today. He said, "We've agreed to split the Strait with the Iranian Navy. We'll take the upper half." And he's talking about the fact that many of the vessels are now at the bottom of the sea following the 40-day campaign against the Iranian Navy and the IRGC.
So Trey, what's next? Are we expected that we're going to just start seeing bombs dropping again, or are there going to be attempts at further negotiations?
The bottom line here is it's up to President Trump about what happens next. But the Iranians made clear, as they have in the past at the negotiating table, that their efforts are not going to reach any sort of solution. And when we look at the issues that we're talking about here, these are very critical issues. We're talking about Iran's nuclear program, access in the Strait of Hormuz, and the idea of unfreezing assets. And we can start at the end of the list and work backwards. But when you look at the assets, President Trump is not going to do what President Obama did, which is give the Iranians billions of dollars that would allow them to rebuild their military and nuclear programs. You have the issue of the Strait of Hormuz, and the Iranians have been using this choke point as their last piece of leverage at the negotiating table because much of their military, their ballistic missile stockpile, and other parts of the IRGC were decimated during Operation Epic Fury. And then this issue of Iran's nuclear program. I've been talking with regional sources, and they say it's not enough for Iran to simply agree that they won't create a nuclear weapon. This source told me early today that officials need to go into Iran and actually obtain the nuclear material, this highly enriched uranium that the Iranians admit is enough to create 11 nuclear bombs, remove that material, and then ensure that there is a dismantlement process that would ensure that they cannot in the future create more enriched uranium. And so the Iranians, at least at this point, according to reports, appear unwilling to adhere to these terms that were laid out, these red lines, by the Trump administration. And this is the point in which the president will have to decide if there is any room to negotiate further or if the war will restart.
Trey, two-part question. Our allies there in the Gulf region have been an incredible asset to us, of course, more than the other NATO representatives for sure. But it seems as if Iran has been particularly hostile to their pressure. So what are your sources telling you about the influence that the Gulf allies have on this chapter of the negotiations? And when Iran says they can't find all the mines, do we believe that they're even trying?
The short answer is no, as it relates to the mines. And I spoke with the president about both of these topics in recent weeks, and he said, look, it's very challenging because they have these small mine-laying vessels, and many of them have been destroyed, but they can use a few $1,000 mine, and it can disrupt billions of dollars worth of global shipping. And so that's an incredibly important part of this equation. Then you have Gulf countries, and the president told me a few weeks ago he was most surprised by the fact that the Iranians were directly targeting these Gulf countries like Bahrain, Kuwait, the UAE, and Qatar with drones and missiles, given the fact that they are not even directly involved in this conflict. But again, this speaks to how unstable the regime is and their inability to look forward what's best for their own country. And we've seen that just in the past 48 hours. They came to Islamabad, Pakistan, and they were unwilling to make concessions. And we heard even today the Speaker of Iran's parliament, one of the main negotiators for the Iranian regime, trying to blame the United States for these talks not working out. The reality is the Iranian regime was largely destroyed. Dozens of top officials, including their own supreme leader, taken out in a series of strikes during Operation Epic Fury. Their production lines for the missiles and drones that they use traditionally as leverage at the negotiating table have been destroyed. And that is why they're so focused on the Strait of Hormuz, because President Trump holds all of the cards here. Yeah. And the president was very clear this weekend he will win either way, whether at the negotiating table or on the battlefield.
Yeah, he holds those cards, and if indeed we open up that strait, Iran no longer holds the Strait of Hormuz hostage card either. Trey Yingst, Live Force in Tel Aviv. Trey, thank you very much.
Thank you, Trey.
Safe.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about all the ways that the advantages are accruing to President Trump here. Not only, as you mentioned, the allies in the area are more fed up with Iran than they ever have been. The country has been decimated. The military has been decimated. And every day that goes on, people figure out other ways to get energy from other places on the planet or around the Strait of Hormuz if needed, so that hostage becomes less valuable.
Very much so. And when you look out, I was reading some of the oil and gas, social media folks, and they're saying, look, already the Gulf states are looking at pipeline bypasses. Yeah. And when you look 5-10 years down the road, it's really going to be a bigger impact. And remember, the Strait of Hormuz fuels almost 90% of Asian markets, right? So this doesn't affect the U.S.
Yeah.
Because our production of natural gas and also refining, I mean, it absolutely obliterates all of those Gulf countries put together. Our production quantities are monumental. So
and a lot of those ships are having to come to us now to get filled. And that's a great win for the United States. You still want the Strait of Hormuz open, but that's a great win for the United States.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.